Chapter 2 The Vanishing Glass. Nearly 10 years had passed since the Dursleys had woken up and found their new nephew on the front step. But Privet Drive had hardly changed at all. The sun rose on the same tidy front gardens and lit up the brass number 4 on the Dursleys' front door. It crept into their living room, which was almost exactly the same as it had been on the night when the Dursleys had seen that fateful news report about the owls. Only the autographs on the mantelpiece had really showed how much time had passed. 10 years ago, there had been lots of pictures of what looked like a large pink beach ball wearing different coloured bubble hats. But Dudley Dursley was no longer a baby, and now the photographs showed a large blonde boy riding his bike on the roundabout at the fair, playing on a computer game with his father, being hugged and kissed by his mother. The room had held no sign of that other boy lived in the house too. Yet Harry Potter was still there, asleep at the moment, but not for longer. His Aunt Petunia, and it was her shrill voice which made up the first noise of the day. Up! Get up now! Harry woke up with a startle. His aunt rapped on the door again. Up! She squealed. Harry heard her walking towards the kitchen, and then the sound of the frying pan being put on the cooker. He rolled onto his back and tried to remember the dream he had been having. It had been a good one. There had been a flying motorbike in it. He had a funny feeling he had the same dream before. His aunt was back outside the door. Are you up yet? She demanded. Nearly, said Harry. Well, get a move on. I want you to look after the bacon, and don't you dare let it burn. I want everything perfect on Dudley's birthday. Harry groaned. What did you say? His aunt snapped for the door. Nothing. Dudley's birthday. How could he have forgotten? Harry got slowly out of bed and started looking for socks. He found a pair under his bed after pulling a spider off one of them. Put them on. Harry was used to spiders because the cupboard under the stairs was full of them, and that was where he slept. When he was dressed, he went down the hill into the kitchen. The table was almost hidden beneath all Dudley's birthday presents. It looked as though Dudley had got the new computer he wanted, not to mention the second television and the racing bike. Exactly why Dudley wanted a racing bike was a mystery to Harry, as Dudley was very fat and hated exercise, unless, of course, it involved punching somebody. Dudley's favourite punching bag was Harry, but he couldn't often catch him. Harry didn't look it, but he was very fast. Perhaps it had to do something with living in a dark cupboard, but Harry had always been small and skinny for his age. He looked even smaller and skinnier than he was because all he had to wear was old clothes of Dudley's, and Dudley's was about 4 times bigger than he was. Harry had thin face, knobbly knees, black hair, and brown and bright green eyes. He wore round glasses held together with a lot of sellotape because of all the times Dudley had punched him on the nose. The only thing Harry liked about his own appearance was the very thin scar on his forehead that was shaped like a bolt of lightning. He had it as long as he could remember, and the first question he could ever remember asking his Aunt Petunia how he got it. In a car crash when your parents died, she said, and don't ask questions. Don't ask questions was the very first rule for a quiet life with the Dursleys. Uncle Vernon entered the kitchen as Harry was turning on the bacon. Comb your hair, he barked by the way of the morning group. About once a week, Uncle Vernon looked over the top of his newspaper and shouted that Harry needed a haircut. Harry must have had more haircuts than the rest of the boys in his class put together, but it made no difference. His hair simply grew that way, all over the place. Harry was frying the eggs. By the time Dursley arrived in the kitchen with his mother, Dursley looked a lot like Uncle Vernon. He had a large pink face, not much neck, very watery blue eyes, and a thick blonde hair that laid smoothly on his thick, fat head. Auntie Petunia often said that Dursley looked like a baby angel. Harry often said that Dursley looked a lot like a pig in wings. Harry put the plates on the egg and bacon on the table, which was different because there was not much room. Dursley, meanwhile, was counting his present. His face fell. 36! He looking up at his mother and father. That's 2 than last year. Darling, you couldn't have counted. Auntie Margaret's present, see, is under this big one for Mummy and Daddy. All right, 37 then, said Dursley, going red in the face. Harry, who could see a huge Dursley tantrum coming on, began wolfing down his bacon as fast as possible in case Dursley turned the table over. Aunt Petunia was obviously sensed danger too, because she said quickly, "I will buy you another 2 presents. Well, we're out today. How's that, Pumpkin? 2 more presents. Is that all right?" Dursley thought for a minute and looked like hard work. Finally said, "So I'll have 39 sweet tums," said Auntie Petunia. Oh, Dursley sat down heavily and grabbed the nearest parcel. "All right then," Uncle Vernon chuckled. Little tyke wants his monkey worth, just like his father. Attaboy, Dursley. He ruffled Dursley's hair. At the moment, the telephone rang, and Auntie Petunia went to answer it, while Harry and Uncle Vernon watched Dursley unwrap the racing bike, a sight camera, and remote control aeroplane, 16 new computer games, and a video recorder. He was ripping open the paper of a gold watch list. Then Aunt Petunia came back from the telephone, looking both angry and worried. Bad news, Vernon, she said. Mr. Figs broke her leg. She can't take him. She jerked her head in Harry's direction. Dursley's mouth fell open in horror, but Harry's heart gave a leap. Every year on Dudley's birthday, his parent took him and his friends out for the day to adventure parks, hamburger beers, or the cinema. Every year, Harry was left behind with Miss Figs, a mad old lady who lived 2 streets away. Harry hated it there. The whole house smelled of cabbage. Miss Figs had made him look at photographs of all the cats he'd ever owned. Now what? Said Auntie Petunia, looking furiously at Harry, as although he planned this. Harry had also felt sorry that Mrs. Figs had broken her leg, but it wasn't easy when he reminded himself it would be a whole year before he looked at Tibbs, Snowy, Mr. Paws, and Tuffy again. We couldn't phone Margaret, said. We could phone Margaret, said Vernon suggested. Don't be silly, Vernon. She hates the boy. The Dursleys often spoke about Harry like as this. He wasn't there, or rather, he was he was something very nasty that could understand them like a slug. What's her name? Your friend? I can't say that name. Yvonne. On holiday in Majorca, snapped Auntie Vernon. You could just leave me here, Harry said. Harry put in hopefully he would be able to watch what he wanted on television for a change, and maybe even have a go on Dudley's computer. Auntie Petunia looked as though she swallowed a lemon. And come back and find the house in ruins, she snarled. I won't blow up the house, said Harry, but they weren't listening. I suppose we could take him to the zoo, said Auntie Petunia slowly, and leave him in the car. That car's new. He's not sitting in there alone. Dursley began to cry loudly. In fact, he wasn't really crying. It had been years since he really cried, but he knew if he screwed up his face and wallowed, his mother would give him anything he wanted. Dinkley Dursley, don't cry. Mummy won't let him spoil your special day, she cried, fidgeting her arms around Dudley. I don't want him to come, Dudley yelled between huge pretend sobs. He always spoils everything. He shot Harry a nasty grin through the gap in his mother's arms. Gap. Just then the doorbell rang. Oh, good Lord, they're here, said Auntie Petunia frantically. And a moment later, Dursley's best friend, Pierre Poculus, walked in with his mother, the one who held people's arms behind their backs while Dursley hit them. Dursley stopped pretending to cry at once. Half an hour later, Harry couldn't believe his luck. Was sitting in the back of Dursley's car with Piers, and Dursley on the way to the zoo for the first time in his life. His aunt and uncle hadn't been able to think of anything else to do with him. But before they'd left, Uncle Vernon had taken Harry aside. "I'm warning you," he said, putting his large purple face up right close to Harry. "I'm warning you now, boy. Any funny business and anything at all, and you'll be in that cupboard from now until Christmas." "I'm not going to do anything," said Harry honestly. But Uncle Vernon didn't believe him. No one ever did. The problem was strange things often happened around Harry, and it was no good telling the Dursley he didn't make them happen. Once Aunt Petunia, tired of Harry coming back from the barber's, looking as though he hadn't been at all, had taken a pair of kitchen scissors and cut his hair so short he almost bald, except for his fringe, which she left to hide that horrible scar. Dursley had laughed him so silly at Harry, who spent a sleepless night imagining school the next day, where he was already laughed out for his baggy clothes and sellotaped glasses. Next morning, however, he had got up to find his hair exactly how it had been before Aunt Petunia sheared it off. He had been given a week in the cupboard for this, even though he tried to explain that he couldn't explain how it had grown back so quickly. Another time, Aunt Petunia had been trying to force him into revolting old jumpers of Dursley's, brown with orange bubbles. The harder she tried to pull it over his head, the smaller it seemed to become, until finally have fitted a glove puppet, but clearly wouldn't fit Harry. Aunt Petunia had decided it must have shrunk in the wash. To his great relief, Harry wasn't punished. On the other hand, he got into trouble for being found on the roof of the school kitchens. Dursley's gang had been chasing him. He had, as much to Harry's surprise as anyone else's. He was sitting on the chimney.
The Dudleys had received a very angry letter
from Harry's headmistress, telling them Harry had been climbing school buildings, but after all he tried to do, as he shouted at Uncle Vernon through the locked door of his cupboard, was jump behind the big bins outside the kitchen doors. Harry supposed that the wind must have caught him in mid-jump, but today nothing was going to go wrong. It was even worth being with Dudley and the Pierce, to be spending the day somewhere that the school wasn't his cupboard or Miss Figg's cabot-smelling living room. Well, he drove. Uncle Vernon complained to Aunt Petunia. He liked to complain about things. People at work, Harry at the council, Harry the bank, and Harry were just a few of his favourite subjects. This morning it was motorbikes roaring like the mechanics. The young hoodlums. He had a dream about a motorbike, said Harry, remembering suddenly. It was flying. Uncle Vernon nearly crashed into the car in front. His face like a giant beetroot with a mustache. Motorbikes don't fly. Dudley and Piers sniggered. I don't know why they did, said Harry. It was only a dream, but he wished he hadn't said anything. If there was one thing the Dursleys hated even more than him asking questions, it was him talking about anything, acting in the way it shouldn't, no matter if it was a dream or a cartoon. They seemed to think he might get dangerous ideas. It was very sunny Saturday, and the zoo was crowded with families. The Dursleys bought Dudley and Piers large chocolate ice creams at the entrance. And then, because the smiling lady in the van had asked Harry what he wanted before they could hurry him away, they bought him a cheap lemon lollipop. It wasn't bad either. Harry thought, looking at it as they watched a Godzilla scratching its head, and looked remarkably like Dudley, except it wasn't blonde. Harry had the best morning he had in a long time. He was careful to walk a little away from the Dursleys so that Dudley and the Piers, who were starting to get bored with the animals by lunchtime, they didn't fall back on their favourite hobby of hitting him. They ate in the zoo restaurant, and when Dudley had a tantrum because his knickerbockers glory wasn't being big enough, Uncle Vernon bought him another, and Harry was allowed to finish the start. Harry felt afterwards that he should have known it was all too good to last. After lunchtime, they went to the reptile house. It was cool and dark in there, with lit windows.
And all along the walls behind the glass, all sorts of lizards and snakes were crawling
and slithering over bits of wood and the stone. Dudley and Piers wanted to see a huge poisonous cobra and thick man-crushing pythons. Dudley quickly found the largest snake in the place. It could wrap its body twice around Uncle Vernon's car and crushed it into dustbin. But at the moment, it didn't look in the mood. In fact, it was asleep. Dudley stood there with his nose pressed against the wall, staring at it with his glistening brown coils. Make it move, he whined at his father. Uncle Vernon tapped on the glass, but the snake didn't move. Do it again, Dudley ordered. Uncle Vernon wrapped the glass smartly with his knuckles, but the snake just snoozed on. This is boring, Dudley moaned. He shuffled away. Harry moved in front of the tank and looked intently at the snake. He wouldn't have been surprised if it had died of boredom itself. No company except stupid people drumming with their fingers on the trying to disturb it all day long. It was worse than having a cupboard as a bedroom, where the only visitor was Aunt Petunia hammering the door to wake you up. At least you got to visit the rest of the house. The snake suddenly opened its beady eyes. Slowly, very slowly, it raised its head until its eyes were on the same level with Harry's. It winked. Harry started startled, then looked quickly back around to see if anyone was watching it too. They weren't. He looked back at the snake and winked too. The snake jerked its head and moved towards Uncle Vernon, and Dudley then raised its eyes to the ceiling. It gave Harry a look that quite painfully. I get that all the time. I know, Harry muttered through the grass. Though he wasn't sure the snake could hear him. That must be annoying. The snake nodded vigorously. Where do you come from, anyways? Harry asked. The snake jabbed its tail to the sign next door. Harry peered at it. Cobra, boa constrictor, Brazil. Was it nice, sir? The boa constrictor jabbed its tail at the zoo, and Harry read on. This specimen was bred in the zoo. Oh, I see. So you've never been to Brazil? As the snake shook its head, defying, shouted behind Harry made both of them jump. Dudley! Mr. Dursley! Come here! And look at what this snake... You won't believe what it's doing! Dudley came waddling towards them as fast as he could. Out of the way, you! He said, punching Harry in the ribs. Caught by surprise, Harry fell hard on the concrete floor. What happened next? So fast, no one saw it happened. 1 second, Piers and Dudley's were leaning right up close to the glass. The next, they had leaped back with howls of horror. Harry sat up and gasped. The glass in front of the boa constrictor's tank had vanished. The great snake was uncoiling itself rapidly, slithering out onto the floor. People through the exit. The reptile house screamed and started running for the exits. As the snake slid swiftly past them, Harry could have sworn a low hissing voice said, Brazil, here I come. Thanks, amigo. The keeper of the reptile house was in shock. But the glass, he kept saying. Where did the glass go? The zoo director himself made Aunt Petunia a cup of strong, sweet tea while he apologized over and over again. Piers and Dudley's could only gibber as fast as Harry had seen the snake hadn't done anything except snap playfully at their heels as it went past. But by time they were all back in Uncle Vernon's car, Dudley was telling them how he had nearly bitten off his legs while the Piers were swaying it. It tried to squeeze him to death. But worst of all, for Harry at least, the Piers were calming down enough to say, Harry was talking to it, weren't you, Harry? Uncle Vernon waited until Peters were safely out of the house before staring on Harry. He was so angry he could hardly speak. He managed to say, "Go, cupboard, stay, no meals," before he collapsed into a chair. Auntie Petunia had to run and get him a largely brandy. Harry laid in his dark cupboard much later, wishing he had a watch. He didn't know what time it was, and he couldn't be sure the Dursleys were asleep yet. Until they were, he couldn't risk sneaking to the kitchen for some food. He lived with the Dursleys for almost 10 years, 10 miserable years, as long as he could remember, ever since he had been a baby, and his parents had died in a car crash. He couldn't remember being in the car with his parents had died. When his parents had died. Sometimes then he strained his memory during long hours in his cupboard. He came up with strange visions, a blinding flash of green light and a burning pain on his forehead. This, he supposed, was the car crash, but though he couldn't imagine where all the green lights came from, he couldn't remember his parents at all. His aunt and uncle never spoke about them, and parents at all. Of course, he was forbidden to ask questions. There was no photographs of them in the house. Then he had been younger. Harry had dreamed of some unknown reason coming to take him away.
Relation coming.
To take him away. But it had never happened. The Dursleys were his only family, yet sometimes he thought, or maybe hoped, that strangers in the street seemed to know him. Very strange strangers. They were two. A tiny man in a violet top hat that bowed to him once while out shopping with Aunt Petunia and Dursley. After asking Harry furiously if he knew that man, Aunt Petunia had rushed him out of the shop without buying anything. A wild-looking old man dressed all in green had waved merrily at him once on the bus. A bald man in a very long purple cloak had actually shaken his hand in the street the other day, and then walked away without a word. The weirdest thing all about all these people was the way they seemed to vanish the second Harry tried to get a closer look at school. Harry had no one. Everybody knew that Dudley's gang hated the odd Harry Potter in his baggy old clothes and broken glasses, and nobody liked to disagree with Dudley's gang.